Hello, and welcome back to the World of Wysteria. I will now continue with Chapter 29, and I will point out that I tried twice to fit this remaining section into one video, and both times it ran just a little long, just a minute or so. So I will be dividing this rest of this chapter into two more videos. So there will be a total of 3 parts. And part 2 and 3 will be rather short, especially part 2. So, continuing on with chapter 29. There are quite a few people out today, Emily observed, as they stood by the window looking down at the square. I hope most of them are yours, she added, with a nervous laugh. So do I, said Will. Any sign of Iris? She asked. No. However, he said, noticing a group of 4 men standing together near the western gate. They don't belong here. The men were dressed like ordinary townspeople, but though they looked the part, it was clear to Will they were outsiders. They're well disguised, said Emily. If you hadn't said anything. Yes, he replied. They came prepared. Will then spotted and pointed out 2 more foreigners standing in front of the tavern, as well as another pair positioned near the eastern entrance. That's 8. Plus the one we saw above the gate, she said. Iris said a dozen. I can't see any more from here, but... Wait! That man, Emily exclaimed, pointing to one of the strangers in the group of 4. Isn't he one of the drifters who attacked us before? The older one? The one who recognized me? The one who started all of this. Though he wore a hat with a wide turned-down brim that hid much of his face, it did appear to be him. I think you're right, said Will. That tells us something. They were Nathan's men. And he's probably the one who guided them here, she said, staring daggers at her nemesis. That seemed likely. Was he the leader of this expedition as well? So, now what? She asked. Will continued to stare out the window, searching the plaza for more intruders. I'm not sure yet, he answered. Couldn't you just conjure up a wind and blast them all out of the square, she asked. Or start dropping anvils on their heads. Will laughed at the image. I suppose I could, but there are too many people around, he said. I wouldn't want to risk hurting them. I don't trust that my aim is good enough yet. Could you somehow vacate the square, she asked? Get all of the townspeople out of there? Even if I could, our visitors would know that something was up, he told her. Obviously, they want to catch us by surprise. If they realize we're onto them, they might just take off. Fine, said Emily. Then we win. I doubt they'd simply give up, he said. They'd reform, or try again later. Maybe with a different plan. Maybe with more men. I'd rather settle this here, now, while we're in a position to surprise them. Then a thought crossed Will's mind. Shouldn't they know better? He asked her. Shouldn't they realize I can sense their presence here? Not necessarily, she replied. I can slip into many worlds undetected. Not yours, not Jeremy's, but many, if not most. I doubt these men understand how much power you have here, which means they probably don't fear you, at least not like they should. If they haven't heard what you did to Daniel and his friend, they'd have no idea what you're capable of. Will thought back to the first altercation with the two drifters. He'd used no extraordinary powers, only his fists. If he'd faced this many opponents on that day, things would have gone quite differently. He would have been overpowered, and who knows what would have happened to Emily. True, he said. That means we have an even greater advantage. Now, Will had to decide how best to use it. I think I have an idea, he announced. Give me a second. I'm going to try something. Will stepped away from the window, closed his eyes, and envisioned the necessary alterations to his world. Okay, he said. Let's see if that worked. They descended the stairs and headed down the narrow corridor, continuing past the doorway through which they'd entered. What's down here? Asked Emily, straining to see what lay ahead. Another door, I hope. To where? You'll see, he answered. After traveling less than 100 feet, they came to the end of the passageway and found a door Will had hoped to see. Now, he said, pushing it open. Emily gasped in surprise. How did you do that? She asked, realizing they now stood at the back entrance to the clothing store. Did you change the location of the shop? I don't think so, he said, as they stepped inside. Will walked to the front of the store and looked out the window. No, it's still here, in the same place. But it can't be, she insisted, crossing the room to see for herself. We were just on the opposite side of the square. After peeking through the window, she turned and stared at Will, who merely smiled. Pick out some clothes, he said. We're going for a stroll. And that concludes part 2, and we'll be back right away with part 3.